Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Security Repo podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dwayne, and we're joined yet again by Kazar,
Hi, everyone.
our wonderful co-host. This week, we have a very special guest, Matt Scheer. He is got a podcast of his own, the Real Threat Podcast. He's the vice president of computer security and incident response at a very large enterprise, which we're not going to name today. He has many years of hands-on technical experience, and he's an official hacking is not a crime advocate, which I believe in. Serves on the advisory board for the Warren County Center, Career Center, Information Technology and Cybersecurity Program, and also volunteers as a technical mentor for the Women's Security Alliance. He's presented at a lot of security conferences and presented a lot of topics, and very recently he has earned a black badge and a lifetime keynote spot at Queen City Con in Cincinnati, among many other honors he has received throughout his career. So welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and appreciate the invitation to come on the show.
Well, I really was excited to get you on here because I've seen you speak a number of times. I've known you from the conference circuit, and I know Kazar is eager to pick your brain on some of this because you have some pretty unique perspective on this, but really good, solid perspective. But the reason we wanted you to come on the show is to talk about, I think, really one of the most fascinating subjects in the history of security and really what we do in the world of security today, and that's phone phreaking. With a PH, phone phreaking. So maybe we could just start super high level and just give us a basic definition for people out there who might not have had an introduction yet to phone phreaking. And why is this interesting to you?
Sure. So phone phreaking is really people who enjoyed exploring the phone system, those that had a real thirst for knowledge, that really wanted to understand how the system worked. And so these are people that got interested in part because the phone system was the first interconnectable global network. Long before we had DARPA, ARPA, the internet, the phone system was really the first interconnectable global network. And this is the thing that allowed people in the United States of America to call anybody all over the world and vice versa. Now, telephone systems were expensive to build, and the companies that ran them essentially got utility status. So they charged kind of an exorbitant amount of money for the time to use the service. In other words, it wasn't very inexpensive. If you want an inexpensive form of communication, you'd have to use the postal service, what we call snail mail today, where you would write an actual letter, put it in an envelope, address it, and send it off. It would take a long time for that letter to get wherever. So if you wanted to have a very near real-time conversation with somebody, you would have to use the phone system. Now, where phone phreaking kind of got its start is because it was expensive. We're talking upwards of $1 a minute in the 20th century, that kind of money to use the system. It got really expensive, and so people would either minimize their use of that service to keep their expenses down, or they would try to find ways around how the phone company would bill people. And so people got interested in exploring the phone system, talking to other phone phreaks that were also exploring the phone system.
So, follow-up question for you there. You said that phone phreaking basically entails exploring the phone system, but to what ends exactly? Is it like, do people want to reduce their phone bill, try to make calls without paying? Is it something else, or maybe more malicious?
So certainly not paying for phone service was a huge motivator. But I would say that some of the other motivations were, can we pull this thing off? Can we get away with it? That exploration. In other words, could we actually place a phone call to somebody that was well known, either because they're a famous person in the popular culture, perhaps a world leader, or perhaps even a religious leader, for example. And so some of these things just became challenges of, can we pull this off? And can we route a phone call and have a loop or bridge with other phone phreaks from other parts of the country? Can we pull this off And then if we can have conversations around, how did we pull this off? What works in your area? What does your telecommunications stack look like? Anybody that's ever been around ham radio operators, for example, they love talking about the technology they use and their ham radio setup. And it was sort of the same thing with your local phone service, because different geographic regions had different technologies available in their technology stack, and people to be able to hop from one to another was also something. We didn't think of these things as pivoting back in the day. Today we have all sorts of pivoting attacks, whether it's botnet or somebody hiding behind a well-known service to essentially target something while they're hiding behind this virtual wall of where their origin IP address might be, for example. So the phone phreaking motivations really ran the gambit as far as those go. And what's interesting to me is that some people that were visually impaired, those that were legally blind, if you will, would have these heightened senses. And some of them got so good, for example, at controlling the whistling with their own mouth, that they could actually whistle these signal switching frequencies to traverse a phone system. And a large part of it was a technical challenge. Why do people climb mountains? Because they're there, because it's hard, because they want to be able to prove that to themselves and others that I could do this monumental thing that people wouldn't understand or might think is impossible.
Yeah, honestly, that sounds fascinating. But it seems to me like the underlying premise there is that phone networks were vulnerable. Otherwise, phreaking could not have happened. So, did you have any examples of how these phone networks were vulnerable at the time?
Yeah, so vulnerable is an interesting term, because something we talk about now, for example, is what's commonly termed security through obscurity. And the idea is that people don't know this is there, so therefore, or they don't really understand how it works. In other words, things are built sometimes for a specific purpose, and people don't think of how they could be used or misused. And that's still a common issue today. Something I spend a lot of time going to conferences and talking about is, think of the security ramifications of everything that you do. How could something be potentially exploited? And understand, like, quality assurance, when we get into these things, they test use cases. They do not test misuse cases. That is, they're not trying to figure out how do we break and abuse these things. So skilled penetration testers, skilled red teamers, some of these people that get in offensive security disciplines are very good at understanding how things are worked around and how to exploit these kind of vulnerabilities. And so they just didn't think that, okay, so we've got these tones, they might be reproducible by a musical instrument because it's the same frequency. And when you get into things like dual tones, you can play two notes simultaneously to recreate that frequency, that dual tone frequency. And also, I wish I had it on me, but for a while, Captain Crunch cereal was giving these inbox whistle giveaways. I know Dwayne's seen this, where it was actually a dual tone. So you would cover up the middle hole, blow through this Captain Crunch whistle, this boson whistle, and it would produce a 2600 hertz tone that phone phreaks could use to seize control over the network. And and touch tone existed before most people actually had it as a service. But phone companies, of course, would try to charge extra for that convenience because it was a lot less work than manually dialing a rotary dial telephone. And one of the things that I love to bust out is a more traditional touch tone phone, and it's got the tone pulse switch on it that people can flip to emulate the rotary dial telephone using the pulse switch button enabled.
So you said 2600 there, and that's actually a pretty good segue, because the reason we know each other is because there's an entire community of security people who get together and hang out. And part of the reason that exists are places like 2600 Magazine, which from my understanding, that's where the name comes from, is the phone phreaking community turned into the hacking community. And the kids from the Cult of the Dead Cow, who were just trying to get around long distance charges with their war dialing and trying to figure out how to connect their BBSs together, eventually that led to things like SmooCon and DEF CON. It's kind of really fascinating that we got here from there. So do you see them really still as the same community, like, or is it just influential and we're a different world now?
So I think it really sort of planted those early seeds. People that were into phone phreaking, like you mentioned, would get into connecting computer systems together, rather. And you had to do that in the early days. There was no cable internet or DSL or satellite internet services for a long time, relatively speaking. So the way that typically computers would talk to one another would be through the phone system. And you mentioned BBSs, which were the bulletin board systems. So what people could do is they could set up bulletin boards to dial into, and these things were, it's hard to describe. They were kind of like a groupware type platform where you could exchange messages with individuals. You could download file areas. The sysops, the system operators that manage these bulletin board systems, could carve out enclaves with certain levels of permissions for people, and they could hook up their friends with little extra permissions or maybe a little bit more daily amount of time, because bear in mind, to operate a BBS, you had to have phone lines coming in, and there was a constant battle between the phone hobbyists and the phone companies wanting to charge them as a business, even though they were charging very minuscule, for the time, fees or nominal fees to use the service, or you might get so much time for free per day, but if you pay a small monthly amount, you get a little more time per day, kind of thing. But yeah, there were definitely, and then when we got into the first internet services commercially available at home for home use, I'm not talking about colleges and universities and research institutions, that sort of thing, but for home use, you would have to dial into a phone number to connect to an internet service provider back in the day, and these days of dial-up. So all of these things involved using the phone service, and if you had to dial long-distance numbers, for example, it got to be very expensive. And so I think phone phreaking was a very good segue, because people, if they wanted to do hacking, they would learn phone phreaking so they could figure out ways to get this communication for a lot less. People that were into hacking would think, hey, I want to get into these bulletin boards and communicate with people remotely. I've got to use the phone service. I don't want to get socked with these huge exorbitant bills. So they would get involved in phone phreaking and figure out ways around those things. Obviously, things have changed a lot, right? So I've got a smartphone here, like probably all of your viewers are going to have, and I pay an unlimited, or I pay a pretty flat monthly fee, and it doesn't matter how much or how little I call people on it. I'm paying essentially about the same per month. So where things have changed, obviously, I'm not connecting to mercifully, we're not connecting our computers using dial-up services these days, because it was pretty slow and pokey. But I think really that's sort of the things that were the start of getting from phone phreaking to hacking, getting from hacking into phone phreaking, the drivers behind them.
I just want to say I didn't realize that I was a junior amateur phreaker early in my life until your presentation. I think it was besides Nashville. I think it's the first time I saw you give the presentation on all this. But it reminded me when I was a younger man in my late childhood, early teens, I, for some reason or other, got left in hospital waiting rooms quite a bit. And what can you do to kill time? Well, you can start playing with the phones, and 1-800 numbers just worked. And I eventually figured out how to explore these phone trees. And then figured out pretty quickly in certain ones, you could hit certain combinations of numbers. and get an outside line. So I would drop out and then start war dialing. And it's just like, well, let's see what this random number in this area code does. I have no idea if I caused any damage or cost anybody any real money. I hope I didn't. In retrospect, 'cause I wasn't trying to accomplish anything. But I can't even imagine like doing that with a goal in mind. I guess I could, but yeah.
And that's why you're not a black hat hacker.
Yeah, I'm gray at best.
All right, Matt. Honestly, I've got a question for you, because it seems to me like Phreaking kind of converged onto hacking, or hacking. The hacking culture emerged out of the Phreaking community. So today, of course, we've got phishing and my personal favorite, vishing, which is voice phishing. And last year, actually, I imagine you've already heard of that. The MGM group, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, they got hacked because of a vishing attack. What happened was someone called their IT support team and impersonated one of their employees and got the support team to reset their 2FA. So that was, of course, a very large problem for MGM, because they were offline for 10 days and couldn't do business for that duration. So do you have any other fascinating stories of social engineering that involves phishing, phreaking, that had tremendous real world impact aside from the MGM story?
Yeah, so I think you cite a really good example, and probably the most recent one that pops into my head. And I've read various things that might attribute that to threat actor group commonly referred to as scattered spider. And I think the big thing is that when it comes to these social engineering attacks, in some ways, some of the phishing, essentially mitigations or the security solutions are they're not perfect. We're never going to get to a state of flawless, right? But they do a reasonably good job of keeping the bulk of the bad stuff out. So it's gotten to a point where it's good enough that it's maybe easier to pick up a phone and start calling people and seeing if you can socially engineer them through the phone, because that's not going through spam filtering, for example. And I think another example that we're running into now is with deepfakes. And there was a well-known story where people were impersonating executives and making a deepfake meeting, a virtual meeting, where they could essentially take a person's likeness and their voice and convince them that there was an active meeting to further sell that the social engineering attempt was in fact valid. And I think, just me personally, I've seen a much bigger number of voice issues, or sort of vishing attempts, and also smishing, where I'm getting a lot of text messages. The phone does a decent job of that, but I all the time am seeing notifications, for example, for package delivery issues when I know I didn't order anything. And I have seen a huge uptick, just me personally, on my own phone. So I imagine that if you had ordered something, you might be a little more inclined to believe, oh no, that thing I ordered that's of critical importance to get delivered, maybe I've got a present that's, a specific date, that's a birthday or an anniversary or something highly critical important, where I really need that thing to get here on time. And so if I'm concerned, I might be a little more quick to click on the link to figure out, hey, is there a problem with this delivery that I just made for an online order, for example?
I just want to throw out, I just recently ran into a term, QR phishing, quishing, which even the person who said it from stage kind of cringed when they said it. It's like, yeah, I know it's not a good term, but what else do you call that? It's like, but can you imagine writing a pen test up? It's like, yeah, your team failed the quishing test.
So what's a QR phishing test exactly?
Just throw up random QR codes around See, because it's the same as clicking a link.
And so who
Yeah.
clicks
So,
them?
yeah. So essentially, you can generate a QR code that goes anywhere. And where it gets a little bit insidious is I could direct somebody to a phishing page. If it's a friend, maybe I just want to rickroll them and I want to send them to Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley in that video. But if you think about the places you go, the last time you parked a car in an unattended lot that was still a pay lot, there's probably a QR code on the wall that you had to take a picture of that would send you to the service they're using to collect the payment. There is really nothing that would stop somebody from printing out their own large QR code to go to a site that somebody's submitting payments to that isn't the actual parking lot site. And not only then do they get your credit card information, they can rack you up for a payment that looks legitimate at the time. You might suffer further insult if your car actually gets towed because the lot doesn't think you paid for that. And so that would be an example of a quishing attack that would be relatively simple to do because you could very simply order, large print paper from virtually anywhere. And so think about it, all the other places you see are QR codes. A lot of restaurants and that sort of thing will have scan the QR code for our most recent menu. Is there anything that's stopping somebody from printing a sticker with a QR code going somewhere else that, you think of an offensive security tool like Beef, the browser exploitation framework that will look for specific vulnerable versions of a web browser, for example. It could actually be directing them there looking for vulnerable web browsers to exploit that mobile device. So it really is, as bad as the terms get, it really is a legitimate attack vector that we as security professionals need to think about and maybe think about in society. Are we starting to over rely on these QR codes? And then how do we protect people from these scenarios like we just discussed?
So you just asked the next question, Matt. How do we protect people? Because like, in social engineering scenarios, do we have any technical tools at our disposal to protect ourselves, or is it just education?
So I think it's a combination. It's education for one, because if people don't understand what the threats are, they're going to be unsuspecting, maybe a little over trusting. So we need to educate people on these threats are real, they exist, and here's some examples that we just talked about. I think in terms of technical controls, there are some things that we can do that we have been doing. So, for example, if you're using your mobile phone to scan QR codes, probably a good idea to make sure you have a security solution that's kind of checking out the traffic. So, for example, if you're going to a known good parking website address or mobile app, we are relying a bit on our mobile application stores to ferret out the bad applications, but still we routinely read about, we found all these bad mobile apps in the app store and they've been removed, but they are out there for a short-lived time. When it gets to things like a website that gets there first, we need to look for things, is this a known good website address? Or is it just spun up 3 days ago? Because the one that spun up just 3 days ago might be uncategorized because it's going to some weird domain that was just registered recently by a threat actor. So there are some technical things we can do, like reputational scoring and time, looking for these young domains versus established domains. Not that that's perfect, because certainly domains will expire, and threat actors for a long time have been registering recently expired long-running domains. So it looks like they have a long-established history, because it will defeat some of these technical controls we've talked about, where we're looking at the age of a domain. But Yeah, these are definitely big problems that we as an industry need to continue to think about and continue to look for ways and strategies to address.
Yeah, it seems like it's something we want a technical solution for, but really this comes down to education and just making people aware. So hopefully we're doing that today with you. If this is a good episode, please share it with your friends out there. Give it a like on social media. I want to move to another topic before we wrap up here. You have a very interesting name out on the socials, DFIR Matt. And I was hoping you could take opportunity on our show to explain where that came from, what that means, just give a little background and around that.
Absolutely happy to explain this. So, DFIR is an acronym. It's short for Digital Forensics and Incident Response. Now, I've been doing security stuff for a very long time. I have very much worn a lot of different security hats over the course of my career. I think my core focus, though, the last number of years has really been around digital forensics and incident response. For me personally, I find it the most gratifying. Everybody's different, right? Everybody has the different things they like when it comes to what they do, information security, that sort of thing. For me personally, I like to be where the action is. So if you have a site or service or anything that's online, it's under attack. It's under attack all day, every day. It never stops. If you've ever looked at web server logs for anything that was recently put online, or system or server logs for anything that was just put online, it will be under attack at the snap of a finger. And you will see these long sustained attacks targeting this, again, website, service, host, whatever it is. If it's on the internet, it's getting attacked right now. And your AI chatbots, for example, that are getting dropped in, those are most certainly under attack right now as we speak. And so these are some of the newer things that come up, but it's an age-old problem. So when you do digital forensics and incident response, I have a good, decent foundational understanding of offensive security. I would not pretend to be a senior penetration tester. Certainly at a junior level, I think I have that knowledge and experience. But what I find fascinating about incident response is understanding a good amount of offensive security, understanding defensive security, and I've definitely been, firewall administration, next generation firewall, pushing out rules, all those sort of things. But what I've always found fascinating is trying to solve the puzzle of this thing was under attack. We need to understand who, what, where, why, when, and how. In terms of an investigation, if we see a security alert, we get a ticket, we need to tear into those details. I often tell people we are part SWAT team, we're part detective, and part coroner. Now, sometimes being coroner means you have to potentially deliver some rather unpleasant news, but it's still a very important job. A lot of people from the outside looking in, offensive security looks amazing, it looks awesome, but it's not just all hands on keyboard hacking. There's a lot of building environments and staging and pretexting and research, and a lot of writing reports and those kinds of things that people don't factor into consideration when they're looking at career opportunities in cybersecurity today.
Well, all right. I think we've wrapped up all the questions for you today, Matt. So I think now's the right time to jump on to the next part of this podcast. And it's my favorite part. It's the get to know your guest part, the guest security retro. So we've got 4 questions for you. And the first one is about command line tools. What is your favorite security focused command line tool?
Ooh, command line tools. Those are fun. I very much like using command line stuff, and so it's gonna get hard to pick a favorite though.
The top
Uh,
3 favorite.
oh, 3 favorite. Oh heck, I let's go with let's go with Nmap because it's great for scanning. You can use it for offensive things. You can use it to find out what's on your network to harden it. Nmap is a fantastic tool. It's gotten a little harder now, but like TCP dump to do packet analysis. And I say it's gotten harder because encrypted communications has really made it a bit more difficult. But I just got done teaching a Wireshark workshop. I like packet analysis. I like tearing apart attacks and looking at those kind of things and figuring out what was there. And I honestly like Metasploit, this just toying around with Metasploit from the command line and running that from the offensive security side. And it's got so many great modules and different attacks and different little nooks and twists to it. You can use it to try to open up a reverse TCP shell. You can use it to try to do man in the middle stuff and pass the hash and on and on and on. It's got a lot of cool things built into it. So it's a bit of a Swiss Army knife tool that you can use to scan things. So let's go with Metasploit.
Definitely makes you feel like a cool hacker, doesn't it? Right. Well, moving on then. We've spoken earlier, and you told me that you've had quite a lot of interview experience interviewing people coming into your organization. What's your favorite question that you ask them during the interview process?
I love that. So yes, I spend a lot of time interviewing candidates that are looking to come into incident response. Everybody from a junior SOC analyst to the most senior computer security incident response team candidate and people that manage those teams, everybody in between. I really like looking at resumes, and I look for things that are a little bit different. So people need to get their degrees and laundry list certifications a lot to get through human resources. By the time it gets to me as somebody interviewing, I don't look at that stuff. What I care about is how much does the person know? And what I'm looking for, what are those things that indicate to me that this person might have a passion, no matter what it is. If they have a GitHub repo, yeah, I'm actually out there looking at their GitHub repo to see what they have out there. If they have a social media account, I just want to see what they're posting, what they're reposting, what they've been reading, what they've been studying. If they have a blog or whatever it is that they might have, that's something a little bit extra. Now, if it's on their resume, I'm going to ask them questions about it. And I like asking very open-ended questions. So, for example, if somebody indicates they've done an offensive security course or they picked up a certification, I'm going to ask them a very open-ended question. What are some of the favorite tools that you used? And, what did you learn using them? What were your favorite things? And I don't care what they tell me. I don't care if they tell me, look, I got really into password cracking and using Hashcat and using Hydra to try to find things on the web and John the Ripper. I don't care if they tell me they have used Metasploit and some of their favorite modules. I don't care if they told me, well, I really got into, SQL map and trying to find vulnerable database stuff. I don't care if they tell me that I got really into OSINT tools and trying to figure out, for example, the tooling that somebody uses within an enterprise and who people are in that organization and the technologies that are displayed there. Whatever it is that's on their resume. And also if they have an interesting journey, like, hey, I see that you have done work as a developer, but now you're working on trying to get into security. What was that? Tell me a little bit about your journey. I like asking very open-ended questions to get the other person talking because I'm trying to identify, one, are they who they say they are on paper? We see a lot of, affectionately referred to as paper tigers in this industry. Or do they really get into what it is that they're learning? And based on the answers and the quality of the answers, and I like hearing people talk about what they're into, that tells me an awful lot about them as a candidate, if they really are passionate, and have they gone beyond just maybe what they had to do to pass some quizzes or certification exam. Have they stuck with it? Those kinds of things are very important to me as somebody that interviews job candidates.
We've come to maybe one of everybody's favorite parts of the show. Regular listeners have come to expect this part of the show. And that is best advice, worst advice, where we ask you to share the best overall piece of advice you've ever received or you've ever given around security. And then we'll follow it up with what's the worst advice that you're hearing out there?
So I think best advice, let's start there, is that you, as in the listener, you as a person, you individually are responsible for your own learning. That is critically important because I understand not everybody has large, vast sums of money that they can take a fancy professional training course that is one of the high dollar courses out there, for example, even if it's quality stuff. If you have an employer willing to sponsor and support and reimburse or cover or pay for that, great. Not everybody's in that situation. I've done actually a lot of things where I train people on my talks. I always point people to the sources of information they can go and learn things without spending a lot of money. And I've actually created some free content myself and delivered that because I want people to learn. I want people to know, but I want the barrier to entry to get into this field to be very low. So I want just people to be able to, that are willing to invest their time, their energy, and their effort to be able to learn always. So with that in mind, anybody can hop on to a video streaming service that offers free video content and watch those videos. Anybody can find free resources on a particular topic or very inexpensive resources. And I know, for example, here in Ohio, our library system, you can get free learning platform like LinkedIn Learning, for example, for free. Just all you need is a library card. So again, you are responsible for your own learning. Worst advice, I guess I could dial it back to many, many years ago when I was, for example, a teenager, and I was told, Matt, yeah, you can't have that long hair, and you can't listen to this rock and roll music, and you can't wear all these skulls and these black pants, and you're just, if you do those things, you're never going to amount to anything. And it's sort of funny because what I've found is that the longer my hair gets, the crazier the outfits get, and the more over the top my stage theatrics get as a public speaker. The better my compensation seems to get, the better my job title gets, and the more elevated I seem to get within the information security community. So all these things I was told growing up didn't necessarily turn out to be true.
Yeah, just being you is some of the best advice you can have. Just be you as much as you can. It reminds me of Dee Snider co-authored a book like in the 1980s when Twisted Sister was real popular, called How to Be a Hero in Your Own Lunchtime. And that was exactly the entire message of the book. It's like, you're reading this because you're a confused teenager. Just be you. Like, whatever that looks like, whatever that is, no matter how weird that gets, just be you. And I've been following that advice for years, and I tend to agree with you. I wear the gray, not the colors, but that's just me. But thank you so much for coming on the show and being part of the Security Repo podcast. Kazar, you got any final words before we get out of here?
I just want to thank you, Matt, for coming onto the show. It's been brilliant chatting with you today, and hopefully our paths cross in the future.
Oh, and you are prolific out there, giving talks at conferences, Matt. Where can people follow your adventures? What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
I think probably the best place is LinkedIn. That's probably where I post most of my stuff and so forth. So if you search for my name, you will find a headshot that's not radically different from what you see today. So that should make it fairly easy to identify. Also, in the X social media platform, I'm at C3RKAH, and I tend to also post the places I'm going to be speaking and things I'm doing, and put those announcements out on those places. Those are probably the best places to follow me and keep up with my travel schedules and so forth.
All right, we'll open the floor to you one last time before we hit the big stop button here on the recording. Any last parting words you want to leave us with?
I half joke with people all the time when I tell them that information security is hard. I should have been an optometrist. But what I do tell people is this: look, if it's in your blood, if you have a true passion for doing this work, if that's really truly what you want to do, stick with it. Even in times where we seem to be in a bit of a difficult job market right now and so forth, there are a lot of people competing for a small amount of jobs. And I'm not sure how long the cycle will last. Hopefully, we get a robust job market bouncing back very soon. I can't predict that when that's going to happen. So if you're struggling to find a security job right out of school, look for security adjacent roles. There is something to be said for having worked on a help desk, having done system administration, having done network administration, and having done maybe cloud administration or cloud engineering or doing DevOps work, those kind of disciplines that are security adjacent that can help you continue to work and break in. It's a lot easier to get a job when you have a job, so to speak. So if it's something you're passionate about, please do not get discouraged and find a path and stick with it.
Solid advice to leave us on. So thanks again for being here. And again, if you remember, if you like this episode, like, subscribe, send it to your friends, send it to your enemies, send it to everybody. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks for having me.